So we shall be looking more into the ruling by the UK Supreme Court yesterday, Friday, the 26th of February 2021, the ruling against Shamima Begum. Now, there was a child at the time aged 11 called Nasima Begum. And Nasima Begum was a child who was betrayed by the London Ambulance Service in 1994. And I only came to know about this after the sad loss of the child's life. And I came to know about this, first of all, by reading the local London so-called Evening Standard. And then a little later, I was met by her father, the late Mr. Eklasur Rahman, and they lived in the Barner estate, and their flat is very near the Christian Street Mosque. And I knew her father, but not closely, just by general acquaintance in the community. And what happened with the death of Nasima Begum has got many things similar in terms of the duties of critically important health and social care and emergency services, so-called. And this one was about the London Ambulance Service. First of all, I campaigned until the Secretary of State for Health, Virginia Bottomley, was forced to resign from the post in the John Major government. So that was my campaign that actually brought to an end Virginia Bottomley's career as a cabinet minister, which reminds me and serves as a reminder to the narrative of my campaigning kind of road. This is what I do. This is the kind of thing that I do, and this is the kind of things that campaign or campaigning means. What I'm saying here about Nasima Begum is related to what the Khoodeelaar campaign has just today started as a campaign about the rights of the children that are being denied the service and the protection by Tower Hamlets Council under the duties owed to the children called safeguarding children duties. I shall come more to talk about Nasima Begum and the relationship between the safeguarding children duties and the duties of the London Ambulance Service. In the meantime, let me just say what I evidentially, factually think about Sadiq Khan. Most of the patrons and matrons, I mean it in a political careerist sense, not in any other sense. Most of the patrons and matrons in the Labour Party are similar, that actually appear to recognize, quote, the usefulness of the likes of Sadiq Khan as children of immigrants, as they say, that are capable of contributing to, as they say, quote, British society. So those people have categorized Sadiq Khan Sajid Javid, and Roxana Fiaz. All of them children of bus drivers, of Pakistani bus drivers, or Pakistani origin bus drivers. And The Guardian is part of the racist cheerers of that description. And in that description, Sadiq Khan has been, quote, praised by his racist endorsers and promoters as an acceptable Pakistani bus driver's son or child. By acceptable, they mean that he will be the perfect example of Thomas Babington Macaulay's Racist Education Act of 1835. That he would look brown on the outside, but he would be English on the inside. A perfect stooge. As the incumbent in the post of mayor, at the expense of London, at the expense of democracy, Sadiq Khan, he is responsible for a large number of really sick, mentally sick, ill, unwell drivers at the wheels on buses, too many buses in London. It's dangerous. Not even one such driver should be at the wheels. And yet there are, I am absolutely certain, too many, because I can't give an exact number because there is no accountability. But there are too many dangerous loons are being allowed to drive buses in London. And we shall come into a special dedicated series of diagnostic evidential reports on the London transport mess. And we shall be doing that to save lives, literally save lives, and to put in context the negligence and the failures of the self-servers, not everyone, but self-servers doing the Black Lives Matter thing now. Because there is an absolutely undeniable frequency, occurrence every day of physical, verbal attacks by drivers on passengers. Think about that. Because if you are a user of buses in London, you will see there is a whole lot of announcements and headlines, including one about the assault on staff, assault on bus drivers. There is no board or there is no kind of box acknowledging that assaults on passengers by bus drivers take place. Think about that. And Sadiq Khan, who is a mental midget and a moral zero, surfaced as a soul cheater, in other words, solicitor, soul teacher, cheater, soul S-O-L-E, like one, and cheater is a fraud. And the only qualification this soul cheater had was he was an ethnicity-linked child of a bus driver. And it shows the extent of racism, rampant racism, among the endorsers of the likes of the London mayor at the present time. When he got the election result in 2016 election, he organized a shebang to thank his masters and mistresses, I mean it politically, At the Sadak Cathedral, this criminal couldn't find a kind of religious or non-faith kind of platform or space or venue. That shows him as a slave, mental slave, Sadiq Khan, corrupt, shameless, and stupid. There is a new assault on the environment by Sadiq Khan, which is the Silvertown Tunnel. We shall come into discussing the disastrous London environment in due course, because it deserves a long and dedicated fact-based report and series. But the fact that Sadiq Khan is being kind of adamant in pushing for the Silvertown Tunnel speaks for itself. One of the things that the scientific kind of inquirers into the various lockdown measures have found, there are not enough scientific inquiries, but there should be more. But what inquiries there have been, neutrally, that is non-partisan, have produced one of the things, which is that the level of the environmental pollution in London during the lockdown has gone down significantly. Everyone admits that. This was not something that was planned, that could have been planned, could it? I mean, the virus, the pandemic couldn't have been planned, not at least by us, not at least by me, not to my knowledge. It couldn't have been planned and plotted. It could have been theoretically, it could have been technically, but it could never be socially, it could never be morally. So one of the enforced, that is compelled on the authorities moves, that is the lockdown, has produced significant reduction in the movement of traffic, in the movement of people, in the movement of polluting vehicles across London. And the result has been significant reduction in environmental pollution of all kinds. And Sadiq Khan, the moron, is surrounded by all white morons as his directors, deputy mayors, etc., as his so-called advisors. Now, we're back long before Sadiq Khan became known at all. I was dealing with a racist woman, a kind of blonde racist woman, solicitor, who tried to recruit me, and she had no idea that I had already dealt with too many of her types before. She tried to recruit me into diversion exercise. Of course, she failed, because I wasn't at all impressed by her stupidity. That idiot was one of Sadiq Khan's. In fact, the main endorsers and trainers of Sadiq Khan, the politician. If she denies it, I'll put her name and her photograph online. But I'm doing her a favor by not naming her and not printing her picture. But she was a racist. And this racist woman was her, Sadiq Khan's main kind of trainer, teacher. So we have in London a corrupt post of mayor created by the crook Tony Blair. And these billions of pounds are being wasted by this Sadiq Khan, failing to deliver a safe environment and a safe society in London, so far as it could be done by the proper and correct and moral and ethical use of the resources that he is squandering. Sadiq Khan and Andrew Lansley, the health secretary under David Cameron have got one thing in common. Well, this is something that is on the record, available in the archives of the behavior of Boris Johnson as well while he was incumbent in the post that Sadiq Khan now occupies. It is that any email sent to the mayor of London is immediately kind of acknowledged automatically. That's it. That no action follows, but that is what he has in common with Andrew Lansley. Now, Lansley was one of the worst criminals in post as cabinet minister who did most damage to the idea of the National Health Service. And as the latest incumbent in the post of Health Secretary, Matt Hancock has got an obscene name or obscene version of his name which cannot be repeated on air, but or in a broadcast. But you can imagine. You use your imagination. So he has got a very kind of rhyming second name somebody devised, and that is the evidence of people being completely put off by the likes of Hancock. Hancock has confessed recently that he has broken the law and he will break the law in the future if necessary. Imagine that. Just take a pause there. The idea, the phrase of due process. The British patriots, or patriotic British, once claimed that this is one of the contributions to civilized order by the British thinkers and British jurisprudents and British jurors. Whether or not it is true or not doesn't matter. The fact is, the phrase due process is now universally accepted as one of the languages used by international communities. And it's a positive attribution. It's a positive phrase. Due process means, in short, compliance with the law. And it also assumes, the secondary assumption in that whole package is that the law is supposed to be itself acceptable. That is to say, it's not a Nazi type of law or a nasty type of law or a anti-democratic type of law. That the law itself is acceptable or is in place after being enacted by the legislators concerned following the due process and the universal requirements and all the rest of it. So it's like an extension of the analysis that I have made about Islamic injunctions. That is to say, the punishment for theft in Islam is cutting off the hand. But I don't accept that is the actual interpretation. The actual interpretation of that punishment is that there is in existence in society all the provisions that safeguard all the necessary rights and duties and facilitate the compliance with the other duties. Say, for example, if a society like in Saudi Arabia, for example, which is where the punishment is still in practice, I suspect, how can that be justified? How can a thief? Most of the acts of theft are based on poverty and lack of access to basic amenities, things that people need for basic life. So, if Saudi Arabia is, which it is, the world's biggest offender state because it squanders trillions of pound or dollar equivalents, trillions that belong to the people, trillions that belong to the people in need. And as the history and the record show, any number, because the number exactly is not known, because the exact number is never published, any number of offenders use London, Paris, and other Western European destinations where they procure and consume white women. How can a thief be treated in that way, cutting their hand off, when that society is depriving them of money that they more or less would be able to use without resorting to, quote, stealing and theft? Think about that. That is a very brief kind of summary of thousands and thousands of sayings that are collected in the sayings, in the hadiths. So Islamic injunction or Islamic punishment is not as simple as it is being treated as by most of the Muslim countries or Muslim regimes, including Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has no right to cut off a thief's hand and say it is done in accordance with Islam. There is no Islamic law that says that you can go to the length of wasting millions and billions in using white Western women or whatever other women from the poorer Southeastern countries, Southeast Asian countries, on sex, while forcing poverty and hunger and destitution on ordinary people found in Saudi Arabia who are forced to commit theft. That's obviously a very short kind of summary. So similarly, when Sadiq Khan goes to appoint, mainly white women, but others that are nothing to do with the multiracial, diverse population in terms of politics, in terms of social connections, societal connections, and in terms of income and the rest of it. Sadiq Khan is a stooge surrounded by racist women and men and others. Think about that. This doesn't need a long kind of wait for answers from the mayor at an assembly charade. Charade is a joke. This assembly, London assembly, is a joke. And Sadiq Khan is a stooge. Now, this is absolutely disgraceful, but it is the alternative, the answer that the Tories are offering is dreadful and shocking and scary. Because Sean Bailey, who is the Tories' alleged challenger to Sadiq Khan, is morally, ethically, intellectually, socially as inept, if not worse, than Sadiq Khan. So we, the people in London, are stuck with series of bananas and worse, as is the Labour Party in the UK with Keir Starmer, who is dead, politically dead. I have known about Starmer being politically dead at least for almost 10 years. And when initially Keir Starmer was paraded on the public kind of platforms or accounts as having been a campaigning, quote, barrister with a conscience, I could not accept it because, for a start, quite apart from the fact that on the facts, he was not one, but the idea that a practicing licensed lawyer, that is either a barrister or a solicitor or a legal executive, could also be a person with conscience. It is a very difficult one to identify in the context of the evidence of such personalities being in existence. So when Keir Starmer was profiled in the legal journals, in the legal kind of platforms as one of the good ones, if you like, in terms of society, I checked on him and I found that he was a liar, especially on the main case that he used to deploy his personality and parade his kind of persona as a caring one, the McDonald's, the two campaigners that were taken to court for defamation by the McDonald's, because these two campaigners had claimed correctly that McDonald's had been selling unsafe, dangerous, sick-making food. And they were kind of not able to pay the hefty fees that licensed law traders demand. And especially if you go to a libel case, which is made even more expensive by the fact that it is only possible to file a defamation action in the Queen's Bench division of the High Court. That division in the High Court in London is the biggest division because it carries the largest number of varieties of cases and causes and issues. So these two defendants in the defamation case that McDonald's brought against them were unable to pay the fees. So for a short time, very short time, this liar, Keir Starmer, as a recently admitted or recently called license holder, worked out a crafty kind of step and maneuvered himself as the pro bono. Pro bono is the Latin, that is without any fees. So pro bono barrister advising them, the two defendants. And he then capitalized on that stunt that he acted pro bono for these two defendants in that defamation action. And then he disappeared. But the fact that he had advised them or had access to their files and papers meant that he could exploit and he could capitalize on and he could make claims about his having acted for them, no matter how short the time was that he did that for. And that is still in his biography, in his kind of history. But the liar disappeared and he never kind of wanted to know what they were doing. And they were persecuted, literally persecuted by the McDonald's, which had the money, the billions, and the dozens of licensed law traders to crush them. So I knew about that by my initial kind of research into the liar. And then there were other things when he was imposted the Director of Public Prosecutions during Cameron's time in the main. So there were things happening in Tower Hamlets, things that were criminal, things that were being planned, criminal acts were being planned and prepared. And I knew the identities of the criminals, the plotters. So I asked Keir Starmer as the DPP to intervene. And I did that in a series of emails on several accounts. And the liar completely stayed silent, this Keir Starmer. So when you, whoever you are, view this and see that this is an world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, you should not just treat this as a slogan. It is not a slogan. It's part of my action, and it's part of the campaign that I organize and mobilize and have been doing so. I challenge Keir the liar Starmer to deny what I've just said and what I've been saying about him for quite some time, over the last 10 years, in fact. And this is why, factually and contextually and socially and democratically and politically and ethically, it is a crime that Corbyn was such an idiot. Because Corbyn intellectually is dim. He's not bright. He is dim. Now, anyone who fancies Corbyn, I don't know, whatever way they fancy him, must not confuse the severity of the impact and the cost and the price paid by the victims of a non-existent political opposition. People's lives are at stake. So it's not a joke. So whoever thought of the idea of putting forward Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party didn't understand the basic task. I don't care what fantasy club they belong to. What I care about and care for is to get the action match what is needed. And the action that is needed at every stage, if you look at the 5 years of Corbyn, was missing. The action was missing. For a start, Corbyn messed up Brexit. He lied this way, he lied that way, he lied every which way, and he completely became invisible in terms of political contraction or political traction, political action, political engagement, political connection. As I have said many times, Corbyn was completely an idiot because every time he came out of his house, there were anything from 6 or 7 television crew or more waiting for him. That's par for the course, because if you are in post as the leader of the opposition in the UK, you can expect any number of journalists waiting for you to answer anything that is in the kind of news headlines or the running order, as they say, within the broadcasting newsrooms. So they would put the camera or the microphone in front of him as he came out. And the standard routine that Corbyn did was to look at them as full of venom in his looks as he could manage before sprinting away or rushing away and getting into a waiting vehicle. The stupidest exercise ever seen in Britain. Even Michael Foot, whom I observed very closely during his early years in post as leader, didn't do that. And of course, the windbag, Neil Kinnock, didn't do that either. Now, in my view, Michael Foot was dubious. And Kinnock was, of course, straightforward, dishonest, and a criminal. But neither of them was as stupid as Jeremy Corbyn. If somebody kind of explains about Corbyn that he actually is deeply passionate about the Palestinians or the animals or the green, whatever, they may be right, he may be deeply committed. But I'm not talking about the depth of his commitment. I am talking about the depth of his stupidity in playing the active advocacy, engaging role of the leader of the opposition. My great-grandfather, whose name is there, Bed Shah, was offered every single day that people came to visit our house or his house for his advice and his blessings. He was literally offered the entire registered wealth and land by everyone who sought his advice. Now, that went on for a very long time. If he accepted those things, then he would have owned the entire part of the whole kind of region there, which would be, as I have said before, worth billions in today's prices. But he didn't accept a single one. He is a spiritual leader. In other words, the genuine fear. He was not a kind of put-up fear. He was an actual fear. He didn't advertise himself. People followed him everywhere. And he came from a unique background. He was a traveler, international traveler, on foot. And he was a collector of printed items and materials from across the Central Asia. Nobody has existed in the whole of Silote of his type. There had been other people like the followers of the saint Shahjalal Mazarradi Yamani, but not like the Bed Shah. He rejected all material offers from people who sought and got his advice, his blessing, and he never accepted anything. He never wanted anything. He rejected that, and he told people off for offering him things and their land and everything else they had. But he was not a political leader, and he was not in a political position. I don't know what he would have done if he were in a political position. But there are two things that all the things that he did were absolutely priceless, literally priceless. Nobody could buy his advice. But that does not mean that he would have been, or he was, the official holder of a political position. And so with Corbyn, he may have passions, but that is not at issue. What is at issue is what he did in opposing what needed to be opposed in political terms. And he let Cameron destroy him. And by destroying him, Cameron destroyed the people that Corbyn was supposed to be representing. And as did Theresa May. So Corbyn was already destroyed before the big liar Johnson got in. So what we are saying here is that Sadiq Khan is even worse than Corbyn. Why? Because the conservatives haven't got a credible chance this time to win the election for mayor at the expense of London. And that is a double default, a double deficit, if you like. Because the incumbent is as bad as could be. And there is an emergency, there is a series of emergencies affecting London. When he got picked up by Gordon Brown as a kind of junior minister, the first task that Sadiq Khan did was to denounce the Muslim community as having a chip on their shoulders. That's the worst insult racists make against people victims of racism. And Sadiq Khan has been proven a liar ever since. And there is nothing, no sign of any so-called Muslim community kind of group holding him to account for any of that. And it is impossible to substantiate the claim, if anyone makes such a claim, that the woman, the first woman elected as, quote, leader of the Muslim Council of Britain, is going to deliver anything different. Absolutely not. And so Sadiq Khan and this female leader of the Muslim Council of Britain will be like Roxana Fiaz. Roxana Fiaz was hailed by the racists in Fleet Street as being the first Muslim woman kind of mayor in Western Europe or something like that. Now, how do you justify a practiced liar as being any kind of symbol of anything dignified? These are parasites. The parasites feed off the image of the existence of a Muslim community. Parasites like Roxana Fiaz, parasites like Sadiq Khan, parasites like Sajid Javid, who brings back to the discussion today on the Supreme Court ruling. Now, it is necessary for people to understand that, I mean, anyone who is new to this program, that when we refer to the Supreme Court, for example, let's go a bit into this. So there is a thing called British and Irish Legal Information Institute, which is only possible to consult because of the internet. I mean, in the past, law reports, accessing law reports was itself a challenge, like climbing a difficult mountain. But the internet has made it possible for the publication of reports of rulings and orders. So let's see what this Shamima Begum ruling says. Well, that particular one is not available yet, but I'll check again. This one is about her application, Shamima Begum's application for judicial review, the application for permission for judicial review. And in that, at item 7 or column or paragraph 7, it says there are 5 steps in the claimant's argument. First, she has a constitutional right of access to the court. Second, decision 2 interferes with that. It should go no further than is responsibly necessary to achieve a legitimate objective. Number 3 is the Parliament has given the claimant a statutory right of appeal under Section 2B of the 1997 Act, and most have intended the right to be effective. And number 4 is the appeal will not be effective unless the claimant can take part in it. And number 5 is that if she cannot take part in her appeal, either her deprivation appeal should succeed or her appeal against decision 2 succeed. Now, obviously, anyone watching this will have to have a good understanding of the actual operation of the British judiciary and judicial process, and be aware also of international law and obligations under the various treaties that the UK remains signed up to. Treaties, especially those that guarantee an individual various accesses and rights and right to fair trial, etc., etc. The whole list is very long. And what I'm predicting, because I have not accessed the ruling of yesterday by the Supreme Court, because I'll have to go through a number of kind of stages before I get there, while I'm on air or go kind of online actively, it will distract attention. So what I'm saying is that my understanding of the operation of the High Court and the Supreme Court, what used to be called the House of Lords, my understanding based on my readings and my studies and observations of a very long time, and my active participation in various judicial activities as an advocate, constitutional law activist, and so on, is that Shamima Begum's kind of appeal or the application that has been rejected by the Supreme Court yesterday was not fairly treated. And that secondly, it would not be fairly treated because the whole Shamima Begum judicial kind of attempts or bids are being subjected to a highly active political barrier. We shall come to the details in the next part.